Welcome to Graduate Compass, the podcast for graduates who haven't quite figured out what their next step is going to be.
Therese, welcome to the Graduate Compass podcast. And for people who might be listening who are interested in doing medicine, I think many of them might think, oh, if you don't do medicine straight after school, then there's no way you can do medicine. But there's actually various different routes into doing medicine. And I suppose your story is a perfect example of that. So could you tell us a little bit about what you originally went to university to study and how you ended up back in university studying medicine?
Hi, Keane. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to chat to you. Yeah, so I started off doing Biomedical Sciences in Maynooth University in Ireland. After that, I did a Ph.D. for 4 years and travelled around to America and all over the world with that. After that, I then worked for 3.5 years with the Department of Health here in Ireland. And it's only then that I went back and did graduate entry medicine in the Royal College of Surgeons here in Ireland. So like you said, a bit of a roundabout route, but yes, so I've entered the graduate entry program here. So there's, definitely a good option for people who aren't sure that they want to do medicine straight after school.
So we'll talk a little bit about what you're studying now and how you're getting on with it in a little while. But I'm just curious, when you originally went to college or university, were you even contemplating medicine? Was it even on your radar?
Yeah, so I really didn't have a very clear path laid out before me when I was in school. So I really liked biology, I really liked chemistry when I was in school, but that's not to say I liked them any more than any of my other subjects. I had it, I suppose, in the list of options. And it was often said that, maybe you should do medicine when I had different discussions about future career, but it was mainly based on the points system. So that's the system we use here in Ireland. And I really did not want to go and pursue something just based on points and based on a score. I really wanted to do something that I felt passionate about and, something for the right reasons. And so it really wasn't on my radar when I was 18. And I chose to pursue science and pursue biomedical science in Maynooth University. So yeah, it really wasn't something that I had, a passion for since I was a child at all.
So for anyone who's listening who might not know what a biomedical science degree is, can you give us a little bit of information or a bit of an insight of what that would entail and why you were drawn to do that particular subject?
Yes, so biomedical science is quite a broad degree. You start off akin to general science. So you start doing biology, chemistry, maths, and then more focused on biology and biomedical sciences. So they're kind of your four subjects that you start off in first year. And I suppose I was drawn to that because I didn't really know that I loved one more than the other at that point. It was a nice kind of broad degree for me. I suppose my passion was to go to university really, and those are the subjects that suited me well. So I was drawn to, I suppose, the broadness of it, and then as the degree progressed, you became more and more focused. So I suppose I majored in biomedical science, and so you had a mix of doing different lab placements, having lectures, tutorials, and again mainly focused on biomedical science. So it kind of started the love of the human body and the processes that happen, and I suppose just that general movement towards biology and again towards sciences that I started to foster really through university. So it was again a very broad degree, and I suppose it drew me because of that.
And when you finished that degree then, where was your focus in terms of a career?
So I remember in my final year, really still not having a clue what to do. So with the science degree, lots of my friends and, lots of my friends were doing masters. Some of them were pursuing teaching degrees. Some of them were traveling. Some people were going to work in big pharmaceutical companies, and just none of that really drew me. I had begin to thought about it at the beginning of fourth year. So at that time, again, I really didn't have a very clear path ahead. And it was only really through my fourth year and doing a fourth year project in a research lab that I started to discover my love of research and biomedical research. And my fourth year project was for about 16 weeks at the time, but I really just loved the topic. I loved being in the lab. I loved trying to find out new information and learning the techniques in the lab. And it was because of that fourth year project then that I applied to do a PhD in that lab for the next 4 years. So I was lucky to get funding for the PhD, and I started it straight away in the May of my final year. So in a way, I was very lucky that I suppose I came across a topic that I was interested in and a supervisor that was willing to supervise me and funding along the way. But yeah, that's kind of how I started my journey into research.
And out of curiosity, because as you'll know, and perhaps people listening will know as well, I don't know, but there are so many different ways of getting into a PhD. There's various different routes. Was it something that was advertised, or was it something that you kind of approached your supervisor about getting the I suppose the funding, or what way did it work for you?
Yes, so you're right. There are lots of different ways, and I think at that time I didn't even know the various different ways of starting a PhD. So I approached my PhD supervisor about potentially staying on in the lab, and at the time there were no opportunities to stay on in the lab, so there were no positions advertised, because the main way of being recruited to a PhD project is through advertisements, like a job advertisement really, where the supervisor of a lab will have funding available and they'll make positions available and people will apply to them and they'll get hired, and you could do your PhD that way. However, that was not an option in the lab at the time. So when I approached the supervisor about maybe writing a grant, and that would mean writing a proposal for the research I would do and then applying to get funding for that specific piece of work. And that's what we did. So it was a bit of a roundabout way, I suppose, at the time. And I remember writing that proposal in my final year, and obviously with a lot of help from my supervisor, we were successful in the application. And I remember just being so excited about the prospect of this project for 4 years and, what we could do with the research. So that was the way that I started mine.
And I just want to kind of interject slightly before I go to the next question, for anyone who might be listening and is a bit confused about, why you didn't do a master's, because there's a misconception out there that you have to do a master's to be able to do a PhD. You obviously don't. It seems to be kind of a myth that has come out. Some PhD programs need it, some don't. It depends what you're doing. Just wanted to throw that out there for anyone who might be sitting here going, did I miss some part of the conversation? You absolutely didn't. It's just a kind of a very common misconception for students. And okay, so you do the 4 years PhD. And now, again, for anyone listening, I'm going to put a bit of context, because I do a bit of work with PhD students, and they seem to go through a bit of phase of, I love this subject, to, oh, I hate this. This is the worst thing I've ever done, to the euphoria of finishing it, and it was the best thing they've ever went through. Did you go through that?
I'm smiling as you're saying that. Yes, that sounds very familiar. I guess my lows were not as low, I suppose, as some people have. I was very lucky in that I did love the subject I was doing. It was in lung cancer research, and I was in a great lab, and I was able to get additional funding to travel to the States and to pursue more research over there. So yes, I did have those moments that you mentioned where you are struggling and you're failing every day, because that's what research is. It was repetitive at times, and sometimes you didn't know which way to turn. It was difficult for those, I suppose, the middle couple of years. But then I suppose I was very lucky that I had the resilience to keep going. And the project the project helped me in that way. I had lots to do, and there was lots to be found out. So in a way, I was lucky that way. So I really enjoyed the PhD. Honestly, when I think back, I would do it again in a heartbeat, as difficult as it was. And I often think about that time that I learned more about myself than the subject matter, because it is a journey of perseverance, of dedication, of, you know, continuing to move forward, even when you feel as if you're not making much progress. And when you look back over the year, or in the end, the 4 years, you really have amassed a huge amount of work. And it really taught me a lesson in patience that way. So yeah, I suppose it has its ups and downs, but on the all, it was a very happy time. And traveling to conferences all over the world as well at the time is definitely something that helped.
I can absolutely imagine that would ease the burden in some way, shape, or form. And I'm really curious to, as well, just because you mentioned the word resilience, and before, the episode hasn't gone out yet, but it will be by the time this episode is out. We're going to be doing an episode on resilience. We're talking to a coach, and I'm just very interested to know, because because you've used the word, what did you do to kind of improve your resilience, or what did you do to get through those kind of, like, I know you've said already that the work helped because you love the work, but I'm just wondering, did you have any tips for anyone listening who's trying to build up their own resilience?
Yes, I think for me, during the PhD, acknowledging the fact that it's difficult at the time is, I suppose, part of, building the resilience. I definitely found that there was no point pretending it was easy, or pretending things were working when they weren't. And the nature of the work that I did was experiments, you know, different controls, different treatments, hours and hours of testing results, and also not knowing what would happen at the end. You know, you're hoping for different results, and more often than not, you don't get that result, or in fact, you've made a mistake 3 days ago that now you're realizing. So I suppose the tip for resilience for me was just being patient with it, and not taking it all on personally, accepting the process as the process, and just trusting it, and knowing that there's no space for perfection in research. You know, you have to just keep moving one day at a time. And if everything fails today, you just pick it up right back if you can the next day, and just go at a slower pace if you need. And also, I think asking for help when you need it is part of resilience for me. It's very difficult to ask for help. And I think that there are times in PhD, or I suppose any time in your career, it's a mark of resilience, I suppose, when you can ask for help and say, look, this is not working for me at the minute. I need another way. Can someone just give me a different perspective on this? And I suppose trying to work through whatever problem you're facing at that time.
Not only is that great research advice, I think that's just great life advice in general. So definitely one for the real eclipse in when we do kind of the best of the podcast. That's definitely going in there. So tell us, when you get your doctorate, congratulations. You achieve this huge milestone. You know, the peak of academia. And I imagine it's a bit like climbing Mount Everest. You've got to the summit, and now you're going, what now?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That what next question. I remember people started asking, and what are you going to do after the PhD? Maybe a year before I finished the thing. And it's through no fault of anybody. You know, it's a natural question. And I suppose, again, it speaks to people's careers generally. You know, what's the next step? What are you going to do after you finish this thing? So again, at the time, I was quite aware that I didn't want to pursue research for the rest of my life. I didn't want to do a postdoc. So that's the postdoctoral position that usually after PhD one would pursue. I felt as if I needed more, I suppose, human connection and human interaction in my career, and the life of a researcher I just knew wasn't going to be the fit for me. At the time, again, I thought about pursuing maybe pharmaceutical work or working in a bigger lab. And again, I didn't feel as though I wanted that. And a big part of what happened next was really just needing some time to, I suppose, come down from the PhD. At the end, when you're writing up, and I'm sure that if there's people listening who've done a PhD, they'll understand that you are fatigued at the end. You're fatigued from just, you know, the penultimate endings towards the end of the PhD. There's lots of endings. And then you're not really sure where to go at the end for a lot of people. So yeah, I needed some, I suppose, time and space. And so I applied for a job in health research funding. And so this was a 2-year program, and it was in Dublin, and so it was local, and it was still in the area that I was interested in. So it was still in kind of clinical research funding, but it was the different side of research, and it was, I suppose, a space for me to get some time and to explore, a different side of research that I thought I would be interested in.
So sorry, I was, the reason I was pausing there, I was really engaged in the conversation, then I realized I hadn't actually turned my microphone back on. I was just like totally focused on listening to you. So it caught me out of it. Just out of curiosity, so when you, how different was that to the kind of day-to-day work of the PhD? Because the PhD was, I know it's studying, but you were working every single day, you had this funding behind you. How different a lifestyle was that then to actually be in an office or in an environment where you, not an office or a lab or wherever you were, kind of doing like research on a job rather than a rather than the PhD, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it was very different, and I think that's what I mean when I say what I needed next was a job. Was this job, because I really wanted some structure, I suppose. I knew that I didn't want to do a postdoc, and I didn't want to go into pharmaceutical or work in a lab really anymore. So this was very different. So this was a desk-based job, working with the Department of Health. It was in essence a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and that was very different to what I had been doing. So I had been doing lots of bench experiments and working in the lab all hours, weekends, whenever experiments needed to be done, and then lots of solo work, really just at the laptop, writing up, rewriting, re-editing, and working through the end of the PhD. So this was completely different to that, and that's what I needed, and that's what I wanted at the end of the PhD. I was very interested still in research and becoming more interested in clinical research, and I really wanted to see the other side of research, I suppose, before I said goodbye altogether. I'll never not be involved in research, but I knew that I didn't want to be at the cold face. I knew that there was something more here for me, and that's kind of why I went down the health research funding side after my PhD.
So that would kind of suggest that, after this kind of 2-year period where you're doing that job, or you got that contract, that you're starting to now think, I need something more, and you kind of, I suppose that's what you're alluding to, really. And how clear at this point was it medicine in that kind of periphery of your vision, or were you still looking at other options?
Yeah, so it started to become more clear at this point. Throughout my PhD, it didn't cross my mind, and I was very dedicated and happy in that job. And I did treat it like a job, as well. But yeah, at the end of it, and I suppose towards this position, it started to become more clear in my mind that I suppose I had been kind of checking off all of the things around medicine, subconsciously probably. I went into, studying more about biology, and then about research, and then about, I suppose, clinical research and working more with people. And in the background, I was always, I suppose, circling, maybe doing medicine in the end. And this position, it was a 2-year internship, and so I rotated between the different departments in the company, and I learned a lot. And again, a lot of it's all based around health research and betterment of people's health and funding health research. And again, it just really became crystal clear for me that I had to pursue medicine as I was in the job. Just from a personal level, it just started to come into focus that actually what I needed to be fulfilled and what I needed for my career was to go and do graduate entry medicine, and to actually just pursue it.
And I just want to again interject, just for anyone who's listening who regardless of whether you're interested in medicine or any other subject, that clarity, we're talking several years. We're talking a 4-year undergraduate degree, a 4-year PhD, 2 years of doing this research job. It took a while, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean it takes a while sometimes to go through those options and, as you said, tick off the different boxes and know that this is what you want.
Yes, completely. And I think actually when I talk about my career to this point, it sounds very linear. It sounds as if I did my degree straight away, did my PhD, straight away into a job, and then knew I needed and wanted to do medicine. However, at the time, and I suppose I'd stress this for anyone listening who is considering medicine or who might be thinking about it, that it does take time for the thought process to come clear. And again, it will come clear at the time it's right if you give it some space. And I think for me, it wasn't a straight path when I was 18 or 17 or even 23. I started medicine when I was 28. And so at the time throughout all of that time, through all of my education and research and working life, it just became more and more clear. And I suppose I realized that that voice in my head to do medicine wasn't going to go away, and that I didn't want to look back in a further 20 years and regret not giving it a chance. And so that was, I suppose, part of the realization for me that I really needed to do this, and it was time for me to actually listen to that little voice that was growing louder by the year, and it was time for me to just jump in.
Before we go to the jumping in bit, I just want to go back, because obviously the medicine thing was somewhere in the vicinity from a fairly early point, but it just wasn't, as crystal clear as it was when you were 28. Do you think you would have lasted in doing the course you're doing now? Do you think you would have lasted if you'd went in when you were 18?
It's something I think about often, I suppose, and it's something I thought about probably in the earlier years of the course. And for me personally, I think now is the time when I needed to do it. I would have been doing it for all the wrong reasons if I had done it straight from school, and I think I would be a very different person. I like the fact that I have experience in health research, and I like the fact that I've got experience in the funding world and working with clinical trials and funding clinical trials, and a kind of a wealth of working life and I suppose just general life years behind me going into medicine now. And I don't know if I can answer that honestly, if I would have survived. I'm sure I would have, but I guess I would have been very different. And for me, this path is the one that I have, and I'm glad of it, and I'm glad that I suppose gave myself the time to just figure it out along the way, and this is kind of where I've ended up now.
Makes total sense. And when you made that decision, right, it's becoming more and more clear, I think I'm going to do this, I might do this, I'm actually probably going to do this, I am going to do this. When you got to that point, what were the steps? Did you know that you could go in and do kind of like a slightly shorter course, or had you done the research already? Where were you at that point, I suppose, in your process?
Yeah, so it's definitely a process is a good way of describing it. So I suppose I started to dip my toe in the water throughout the process. As I became more sure and more trusting, I suppose, of my intuition about it, I started to look it up, and I started to explore different options. And I had heard that the graduate entry medicine program existed, so I was aware of it on the periphery, but I didn't really know the steps to get in. And it was really only when I decided, or when I really leaned into the fact that I wanted to do this, that I went wholeheartedly into the process of educating myself about how to enter the program. So there are two main options in Ireland. There is the graduate entry option, which is the one that I have done, and that is where you do a entry exam called the GAMSAT exam, and it's the same for the UK and Ireland and Australia, I believe. So it's an entry exam. You can have any degree under the sun to do the exam, and you get into the medical program. And so with that, I have people in my class who've done music, who've done Irish, who've worked as engineers for years, who are pilots, who have degrees in everything and anything. And everybody just did this entrance exam and got a position on the course. I think the UK do the exam plus an interview, but the same premise exists of any degree. The other option is a mature entry pathway, and that's if you're over the age of 23, you can do the degree that way. So I know in Ireland, the course is 1 year longer, so it's a 5-year course instead of a 3-year course. They also have an entrance exam, and that's the HPAT exam, and they have an interview process there, and then you can enter the program. So as I began to become more sure of, this path that I wanted to pursue, I obviously learned all about the different ways of getting in. And yeah, that was when I decided that I would try the GAMSAT exam, see how I got on, and then go from there, really.
Like, I suppose that brings us, more or less to today. I know you've obviously, you're in the third year of what is a 4-year degree, I believe. And so you're getting towards the end of it now. It's obvious from speaking to you that it was the right decision for you. I don't even have to ask that question, because it just comes across, the energy and your passion, and I suppose the logic that you probably wouldn't have lasted 3 years doing medicine if you didn't love it and have that love for it. So I'm curious, looking back and keeping the kind of the listenership in mind here, who may not entirely have their own direction. What advice would you give them looking back, and what kind of tips or hints or any kind of suggestions for anyone who's listening, regardless of career, to help kind of them figure out their own path, would you give?
I think regardless of where you're at, even, or, what passions you may or may not have, I think my main advice is to be patient with yourself and to really trust the voice that you have deep down. To, I suppose, don't question it to the point where it goes away. If you really keep asking the questions, and that voice remains, that dedication to whatever the cause is remains, I think that's when you can trust it. If you keep, I know that I did try to explain, perhaps I don't want to do medicine, do I want to pursue this career? I've already established myself in the career that I had, and I loved my job, and I loved that world of health research funding as well, but still I had that voice that I couldn't get rid of, no matter how many times and how many different excuses I threw at it. It just wasn't going away. And so I suppose in whatever career you're doing, just to really tune into that constant voice that you might have. And I suppose if you don't have that voice, that's okay too. And it's not always very clear for everybody. And I guess you can just keep living your life in a way that you won't regret it. And, if you keep trying to live every day, being honest with yourself, doing the thing that makes you happy, you're never going to look back and regret what you've done, or regret the job you're in or aren't in. So I suppose that would be what I would say to anybody who's kind of in the midst of trying to work it out. And having said, the fact that I am in the program now, I still don't have it all figured out. Who knows where I'll be when I graduate, and who knows what will happen in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in this career. But I suppose I'm just going day by day and knowing that right now, I suppose I'm headed in a direction that I'm happy with. And I suppose that's really all I can ask for. Just to reiterate that you're never too old and it's never too late. So, just give yourself the space and trust yourself.
If you're interested in learning more about graduate entry medicine, I do recommend the first port of call is if you're still a student or a recent graduate, to go back to your university and ask them if they can have a conversation with you, maybe with a career advisor, and get some more information. If you're not, then what you could do is you could look up the medical schools that are local to you and approach them and ask to speak to one of their recruitment officers, and just to see what is involved. Some graduate entry medicine courses require you to have a science degree, others do not, so definitely worth having a conversation either with your old or current university, or perhaps with a university that you would be interested in doing medicine with in the future. In the meantime, if you can help the show grow, as always, it is massively appreciated. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, it's all at Graduate Compass, or tell your friends about it and share an episode would also be hugely appreciated. In the meantime, I'm Keanes Sullivan. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Graduate Compass. Remember, if there is a degree subject or specific industry you would like to be featured on any future episodes, then we would love to hear from you and know what you are trying to find out. Our email is info@graduatecompass.ie.